Jacobite, a Muslim village tucked away in the mountains of Kalamun to the north of Damascus. Everything here is similar to innumerable other Muslim villages. The architecture, the way people dress, the way they live. But there is one fundamental difference. Arabic is not spoken here. The people speak Aramaic, or rather, a dialect of Aramaic related to Syriac. Indeed, the inhabitants of this Syrian village are direct descendants of those Aramean peoples who, many centuries before Christ, inhabited Upper Mesopotamia and then moved south to lay their roots throughout the Middle East, from Turkey to Iraq, to Syria to Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. Islam is the faith of these people who hold in honor Abraham, the wandering Aramean as the Bible calls him, the great prophet, the friend of God, and their direct ancestor. And they guard their Aramaic dialect jealously. Over 3,000 years ago, their ancestors used the same language. It is a source of wonderment to hear people chatting about everyday matters in this age-old language that has been passed down orally from one generation to the next for over 3 millennia. Right now, the subject of discussion is an upcoming feast day. The final word, as always, will be spoken by the Mukhtar, the village chief. The songs are in Aramaic. Even modern songs are translated from Arabic into the ancient language that parents teach their children, who in turn will teach their children and grandchildren. Malula, another small town to the north of Damascus, where Aramaic is also spoken. The name has Aramaic roots. Malula means entry. This time, the inhabitants are mainly Christian. Malula and its surrounding area is in one of the oldest inhabited parts of the Middle East. Stone Age man lived here some 50 to 60,000 years ago. The area is strewn with caves once used as sites of worship or burial, or, when necessary, for defensive purposes. The way they're laid out would allow a handful of men to resist the attack of an army. One example is the inaccessible cave known as the Fortress. Another enormous cave called the Castle could hold up to 1,200 people. One of these caves, originally a place of burial, houses traces of the first Christian settlements dating back to before Malula was developed outside the caves. A cross and a bird, possibly a pelican, the symbol of Jesus. A vandalized carving of the Virgin and Child. A peacock that symbolizes immortality. A Greek inscription that refers to Christ's victory over the pagans, and a symbol of the Trinity. Apart from the name, additional evidence of the growth of the Aramean community in Malula can be found in local traditions and in the day-to-day conversation of its current inhabitants.
على الله تعود.
ما احنا عند الحطيصة.
ايه لكون ادوك ياها.
مليش عليها.
بس يا هيك.
أنا غطي صاحب بيعو. صاحب بيعو أهلا وسهلا ها. أنا صاحب بيعو.
In the course of the centuries, the Aramaic language was divided into various dialects: Nabatean, Palmyrene, Mandean, and Syriac, in addition to the dialect spoken in Jacobite and Malula in the Kalamun Mountains. In the highest part of the village is a typical Malula house. It's the home of a 105-year-old woman, a shrine for the memories, emotions, and illusions that have filled her long life. She talks about them in Aramaic, the only language she knows, and one of the few things that have never changed for her.
نزلون مشتغلة برية مشتغلة بشيكيا والثاني حق البيع الهوخة وبكع طيلح البيتيوثة وأرهطين ناح وحيت إذ كان بيتيوثة وكعنا حم معلولة.
After the Emperor Constantine's Edict of Milan in 313 AD, communities like Malula emerged from the safety of the caves and gained importance as centers of Christianity. Indeed, some Christians felt encouraged to destroy pagan temples or transform them into churches. The Monastery of St. Sergius above Malula is an extraordinary example of this kind of transformation. The doorway is so low that non-Christians and Christians alike are obliged to bow to enter what is considered to be one of the oldest churches, not only in Syria, but in the entire world.
باسنا جناح من شيزا آمين تقدش اسمك ويثالي ملكا جفكن أبونا حتي بشمو تقدش اسمك ويثالي ملكا جفكن إروتيا إخ بشمو تجيب على لا أتلاح رحمة أخر يوم وفريلة تيودا.
The Lord's Prayer, recited in Aramaic by this girl, is a familiar sound for these ancient stones and the centuries-old woodwork. Probably built around the year 325, the year of the Nicene Council, The church is a visual representation of the transition from ancient paganism to the Christian Revolution. That transition is physically embodied in some of the wooden beams that scientific tests have shown are over 2,000 years old. And by a pagan altar with a hole through which sacrificial blood would drip to be collected in jars. This means that parts of the building date back to before Christ. For some people, the use of pagan elements in a Christian church might be considered sacrilegious. But to believers free of prejudice, it's a sign of the deep change that occurred in the hearts of men with the advent of Christ. Legend tells of a Christian girl called Tekla, whose father, a pagan and perhaps a king, wanted to marry her off to a pagan officer. While trying to escape from her father's soldiers, Tekla found her path blocked by a high rock face. The girl prayed to the Lord to give her an escape route. Suddenly, the rock face split open to reveal a passage that became known as St. Tekla's Gorge. The gorge became the girl's home, and after her martyrdom, St. Tekla was buried here. Every day, pilgrims from all over Syria and from other countries visit the monastery sanctuary of St. Tekla in Malula that houses the saint's tomb and relics. Saidnaya is another Syrian town that, before the arrival of the Greeks and Arabs, was inhabited only by people of Aramean descent. The Aramaic heritage is reflected by the town's ancient name, Danuba. Like Malula, evidence of prehistoric Saidnaya lies in caves where pre-Stone Age objects have been discovered. The town's recorded history began in the indestructible monuments erected by the Greeks during their 400-year occupation. The Christian tradition is evident in the many local churches and monasteries, the most important of which is dedicated to Our Lady of Saidnaya. Built 1,500 years ago, it was known as the Fort due to its impregnable defensive position. This monastery sanctuary is visited daily by tourists and pilgrims of different faiths, including Muslims. The monastery and sanctuary are looked after by nuns of the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch, to whom Christians of the Byzantine Church who speak Arabic answer. The nuns are also responsible for restoring antique icons and safeguarding a veritable treasure trove of ancient manuscripts. Although these are now in Arabic, in the Middle Ages, Saidnaya was an important center for the copying of Syriac manuscripts. These are only some of the books from the monastery's original library. Many more have been burned, stolen, or destroyed by the ravages of time. In the reliquary, the icon of the Blessed Virgin, called Shagura in Aramaic, meaning the famous one, is surrounded by an incredible collection of ex-voto offerings that reflect the gratitude of countless beneficiaries who come from many different countries and many different sectors of Christianity. roots of this Christian eclecticism can be found in the life of St. Simeon Stylites. Simeon was born in Cilicia in 390 and later moved to Syria. After subjecting himself to intense acts of contrition and mortification, he moved to a mountain near Aleppo. Here, he built a column on which he lived and preached ceaselessly to ever-growing crowds of people who flocked to him in hope of his blessing or to be healed. The name Stylite, from Greek stoulos meaning column, was given to his followers who became known as Stylites. The base of his famous column is still visible today in the monumental remains of the church named after him at Kalatsiman, or the citadel of St. Simeon. The column was 36 cubits or 15 meters high, and from its summit, the saint healed, solved disputes, and preached social justice until his dying day. The historian Theodoret, Simeon's contemporary, wrote that pilgrims to the saint's column came from many different countries: Ismailites, Persians, Armenians, Georgians, Himyarites from southern Arabia, as well as Spaniards, Britons, and Gauls. The existence of different faiths was not important to the saint. To him, all that mattered was God. "Keep your own faith," he used to say. "Just leave me my God." That's why at Kalatsiman, we often find the Syriac cross alongside Greek, Byzantine, Latin, and Maltese crosses. These symbols of different Christian traditions are a concrete indication of St. Simeon's eclecticism. Dotting the countryside around Kalatsiman are the remains of nearly 1,000 villages and towns that prospered between the 1st and 7th centuries AD, and then fell prey to a series of economic crises, wars, invasions, and natural disasters. These are the famous dead cities of Syria's northern limestone hills. Here, even place names conjure up pictures of utter desolation. This valley is called the Valley of the Wind's Door. There is evidence of burgeoning spirituality everywhere, particularly in the remains of imposing churches. Along with financial prosperity, the inhabitants once enjoyed a rich religious life founded on their Christian faith. But now, all that is history. A walk through the ruins and rubble of what were once architectural jewels and centers of Christian spirituality is a sobering experience. Among countless examples of the extreme degradation is the baptismal font of the Church of Mushabbak, today used as a watering trough for sheep. The once magnificent Byzantine church of Kalb Lauze, that means almond heart, is another example of past splendor. Fortunately, in modern Syria, the idea of persecution or even religious discrimination is absolutely foreign. Perhaps one day this extraordinary Christian heritage will be safeguarded in the measure that it deserves. It's a priceless treasure for Syria as well as for the rest of the world. At Al-Ruzafa are the ruins of the Church of St. Sergius. The Bedouin tribes of Syria, many of which were Christian, were particularly devoted to St. Sergius and often visited his sanctuary in Ruzafa. Here, too, there is evidence of the ancient Syriac liturgical rite, for example in the characteristic bima, the dais in old Syriac churches from which the priest read the holy books. The Aramean heritage of the Syrian Orthodox Christians is also rich in traditions tied to the liturgical calendar. These are celebrated with great enthusiasm and much ceremony, and include a contest held on Palm Sunday, during which people try to touch the holy palms carried in procession by the bishop, and the washing of the feet ceremony on Holy Thursday that takes place here at the archaeological site of Kalat Simam.
يودو شريف شمعون شارب حاتم رزود مكي خوتو
Sadad is a small town in central Syria. In the solitude of the Church of St. George, a group of girls practices an Aramaic song, the most beautiful and simple of prayers taught by Jesus, the Lord's Prayer. There's an underlying element of melancholy in this simple religious melody, as in all the songs and melodies belonging to the Syriac Christian musical tradition, that expresses so well the endless suffering and hardship that this oppressed people has had to bear. The walls of this church, like the walls of the churches of St. Sergius and Bacchus in the same town, are decorated with ancient frescoes depicting scenes and people related to the Christian tradition and to the Syrian Orthodox Church in particular. The simplicity of the images is immensely moving. A description of each figure and each scene is given in elegant Syriac writing. A large number of ancient manuscripts and holy books written in Syriac is preserved here. Deplorably, the congregation treats with great familiarity priceless books that warrant a greater sense of preservation. Kamishli in Syria is a border town created by the Syrian Orthodox Christians who had fled from nearby Turkey in the face of persecutions that destroyed their villages, burned their fields, and transformed their churches into mosques. Just beyond the national border is Tur Abdin, which means Mountain of the Servants of God. 4,000 years ago, along with northern Syria and Iraq, this region was the cradle of the ancient Aramean civilization. After the coming of Christ, it became the land of the Syrian Orthodox Christians. Nowadays, that presence has been largely lost in the annals of time. Kafro, Bazibrin. Until the beginning of the 20th century, these were prosperous Christian villages. Now, they're ghost towns surrounded by abandoned fields. Fanatical persecution by the Kurdish people, influenced by short-sighted governments to carry out an insane policy of religious cleansing, has reduced arable land around the Christian communities of Tur Abdin to wasteland. Fortunately, today the Republic of Turkey has distanced itself from the Ottoman policy of yesteryear. The last Christian family to live here in the village of Urdnus, now called Baglabasi, was massacred in 1992 by Muslim Kurds who had been promised their victims money and land in return. The 5th century church of St. Kyriakos is locked up. A Muslim woman keeps the key. Near the village of Salah is the small 5th century monastery of St. Jacob, staffed by 3 monks and 2 nuns. Today, there are only 2 lay members in the Christian community that used to flourish around the tomb of the saint. We can't help but compare the decline of the Christian presence with the ruins not far from the monastery of the Persian Temple of Heracles that date back long before the coming of Christ. Near the remains of the 8th century San Sobo in Ha is the Church of the Virgin Mary, whose origins go back to the early centuries of Christianity. Local traditions hold that the 3 wise men stopped here on their way to Bethlehem. Once a prosperous and bustling center of activity, it is now little more than a vantage point in what was formerly a Christian land. Ainvardo was founded, like most places in the area, before the coming of Christ. 100 years ago, it was an entirely Christian community. Today, the inhabitants are nearly all Muslim. Only 8 Christian families remain. According to local tradition, this once wealthy town with several churches was saved by St. George at the time of the massacres of 1915, which decimated the Christians living on the high plateau of Tur Abdin. Many of the village's inhabitants are said to have seen the saint with their own eyes as he charged the aggressors on his horse, lance in hand. It's sad to note that until only a few years ago, local oppression and murderous fanaticism against the Christian community were still the order of the day. But while the memory of those tragic circumstances is still vivid, a ray of hope appears. A few Christians have decided to remain here, stubbornly eking out a precarious living in the firm belief that centuries of violence and murder belong definitively in the past. They are convinced that this mountain of the servants of God will soon, once again, be a flourishing seat of Christianity. They contribute to this dream by sending their children every day to the monastery to learn the language of their ancestors. Three monks, 2 nuns, and their young pupils are the congregation of the 4th century monastery of Mor Gabriel, another outpost along the symbolic Christian defense line in the Tur Abdin mountains. Working the fields and tending the few domestic animals takes up much of the time of those who live in the surviving Syrian Orthodox monasteries. Like the inhabitants of any besieged fortress, they must be completely self-sufficient when it comes to the essentials, and their commitment itself becomes a form of prayer and dedication to the Lord. How many young martyrs have died here? But today, perhaps more than anywhere else, these children offer hope for tomorrow. Arkah is another semi-abandoned village in the Tur Abdin hills. State-appointed teachers don't come here. This is Kurdish country, and people are afraid. This teacher is a volunteer sent by the bishop. Perhaps he too is afraid, but he has a mission to accomplish. The children are learning their language. They know that when they grow up, their mission will be to pass it on to future generations. The parish priest insists we join him for lunch at his home. His eldest daughter prepares typical local dishes, and in our honor, the village Mukhtar joins the party. Among the pictures on the walls is a portrait of Ataturk, the founder of modern Turkey, perhaps a tribute to the man who was the first Turkish leader to advocate the separation of political power from any form of religious fundamentalism, thus indirectly helping the Christian cause. The parish priest of Keferdze also invited us to his house. Another sign of hope for the future is that 15 Christian families and 15 Kurdish families live peacefully side by side in his village. This is why he sometimes has visitors with whom he speaks in Kurdish. Among the photographs and pictures on the walls is a portrait of a young bishop, the current patriarchal vicar of the Syrian Orthodox diocese in Germany. He was born in this village and was baptized by the same priest who offers us tea. The church, dedicated to Saint Ozazoil, dates back to the 5th century. As always, the congregation is made up almost exclusively of women, children, and elderly people. There is little to keep young people here, and inevitably, they can't wait to move away. There are still a few villages where the original ethnic identity is intact. In Bekuzione, now Bakizian, the 120 to 130 inhabitants divided among 14 families are all Christians. 100 years ago, this was the norm in Tur Abdin. Today, it's a rarity. The village prepares for a celebration. In every house, women are busy cooking traditional dishes. Bread is made according to a centuries-old recipe using wheat flour ground with a mill that probably looks much the same as those used in Noah's time. The cross marked on the dough before it's placed in the oven is a sign of thanks to God for having provided the food, as well as a symbol of propitiation that He will continue to do so in the future. Easter eggs are decorated according to an age-old ritual. Fingers caress the fragile shells with traditional expertise. The eve of this celebration is no different to the eve of such celebrations anywhere else in the world. Unmarried women prepare to look their most attractive, just in case there's a future husband at the party. The older women give advice and offer alternative solutions. In this age of discotheques, drugs, and extreme forms of entertainment, in which the so-called advanced societies celebrate consumerism and the satisfaction of every human whim on the collective altar, a party like this serves as a reminder that, in the words of Jesus, "Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Despite improved conditions for Christians in Tur Abdin, their survival has not received the all-clear. Danger may still lurk in the embers of fanaticism that constantly smolder in this region. The Syrian Orthodox Church is the institution that champions the cause of the Aramean population, and it does what it can. The role of protector and guardian is delegated to the parishes and to the few remaining monasteries, the real strongholds of Tur Abdin's Christian fabric. Ruins of monasteries that were active up until the turn of the 19th century are commonplace. Among the still functioning monasteries are two that are especially important. Tur Abdin, the Saffron Monastery, lies southeast of Mardin, the largest city in this Turkish province. The name comes from the color of the local stone. Built in 493 AD, Tur Abdin was considered the citadel of the Aramean Christians of Tur Abdin. For almost 800 years, from 1160 to 1920, it was the seat of the Syrian Orthodox Patriarchate that is now located in Damascus. Today, only 2 monks live here. With the help of a handful of lay volunteers, they run a school for orphans and tend to the religious needs of the local congregation.
Okay, there's an old building also. They have a most important Christian. They believe that before sun god, and there's a before BC, about 2,000 years ago.
Our guide explains that more than 2,000 years ago, the oldest wing of the monastery was a temple to the sun god.
Follow me, please. Come in, don't worry, come in. Yeah, it is the old temples before BC 2,000 years ago, and this is a window. It's the sun raising of the
There was a window here, facing east, before which pagans would gather to worship the rising sun.
Come worship for sun. And this part is for sacrifice, and people they give.
In the sacrificial area, animals were offered to the sun god.
More important is ceiling. You can see ceiling without.
These stone slabs are fitted together without the use of mortar or metal braces. They're approximately 2 meters high and simply fitted next to one another in 6 rows to the left and 6 rows to the right of a central row of keystones.
They hold each other like that. These doors are 300 years old.
The doors of the crypt that houses the tombs of the patriarchs are 300 years old. The church, with all its stucco work, ornamentation, furniture, and altars, is the work of Aramean craftsmen. The Patriarch's throne used to be in Antioch. On the back, starting from the middle, are the names of all the patriarchs that have succeeded each other through the centuries, from St. Peter to the present day. "300 years ago, these litters were used to take the patriarchs on long pastoral journeys along the rough, often hostile roads of Tur Abdin. The altar of the Virgin Mary is a masterpiece of Aramean craftsmanship. It's entirely made of walnut wood, joined without nails or metal braces. At the foot of the altar is a fragment of the mosaic from the cave of St. Peter in Antioch that dates back 1600 years. The time has come to say goodbye, but first our host has something to show us before we leave.
Look, down is Syria, Damascus, Patriarch. And those were monasteries. Mor Gabriel, Virgin Mary, destroyed by the enemies of our faith because religion hatred.
Oh, it's late. We have to get going if we want to arrive to Mor Gabriel before it's dark.
All right, because when come dark, Mor Gabriel, doors closed, right.
Southeast of Midyat, the Monastery of Mor Gabriel is the geographical and spiritual heart of the plateau and the safest place of refuge in the entire region. Founded in 397 AD, it's not only the oldest surviving Syrian Orthodox monastery in Turkey, but also the most active one. Just in time. Every evening at sunset, the great iron doors are closed and will only be open again the following morning. Among the many activities here, the most important is the school. The Monastery of Mor Gabriel is truly a bastion of Syriac tradition. Today, the walls, which in the course of the centuries have repelled armies and predators alike, serve to discourage those who would like to eliminate the very notion of Christianity in this region. The Monastery of Mor Gabriel is the seat of the Archbishop Vicar of Tur Abdin, who has the heavy responsibility of keeping Syrian Orthodox Christianity alive in the land of its birth, and, when necessary, of offering the faithful a refuge in the monastery itself. But where is everybody? Oh yes, of course. Today's Sunday. The monastery has recently been restored, a long but rewarding job carried out with scrupulous regard for the original architecture. This is especially true of the church, that for years was used as a stable by Muslim hordes, who showed no respect for the tombs of over 12,000 slain Christians. A few tombs, some mosaics, and the chapel of Mor Gabriel, the founder of the monastery, are all that survive of the original church. Renovation of the chapel included the narrow passageway through which the saint entered and left his cell to join his brothers or to pray in the chapel. We bade farewell to the tranquility of Mor Gabriel and set out on the long journey to Iraq, the third country that, along with Syria and Turkey, made up the Arameans' homeland. After overcoming a few unexpected bureaucratic problems, we arrived at the Marmatai Monastery in the region of Mosul. Renovation work is in full swing. Workers go about their business as we visit the chapel that houses the tombs of Marmatai and other saints. Among them is Gregorius Baribroio, who lived in the 13th century and is the most famous of all Syriac writers. Mar Banam is one of Iraq's most impressive monasteries. It was built on the site where, in around 382 AD, Prince Banam was murdered with his sister Sarah and 40 other Christians by order of his father Sennacherib, Lord of Nimrod, who would not tolerate his children's conversion to the religion of Christ. The building is considered the finest medieval Christian monument in Iraq. The church was built in the 12th or 13th century and has two magnificent bas-reliefs, one of Mar Banam on horseback triumphing over the devil, the other of Saint Sarah being baptized. Copies have been incorporated into the facade in place of the vandalized originals. Behind the monastery, on the actual site of the massacre, is a mausoleum that houses the remains of the two saints and the faithful who died with them while praying for the forgiveness of their persecutors. In the Iraqi villages inhabited by Syriac Christians, many churches have been destroyed by the ravages of time. But, as in Bartali, near Mosul, many new places of worship and community activity have been built in recent years. The Church of Mar Shmouni boasts a font that dates back to 1343. In Jerusalem, as we look over the rooftops and terraces on the slopes of the Hill of Zion, our attention is drawn to the little bell tower of St. Mark's Monastery.